Today, we become legends.
Hey, my name's Inter, and welcome back to Inter Games for some more Reddit Reacts. There was an interesting post made a few days ago on r/Smite about the influence of content creators, and apparently, according to this guy, how content creators have made Smite 2 worse. It's a relatively controversial post. It has quite a lot of upvotes, but it's also only 73% upvoted, which for Reddit is very low. So yeah, it caused quite a bit of controversy. I've seen a couple of other creators react to this as well, so I thought I would give my own take on it as a low-effort second channel Reddit React. So yeah, without further ado, let's jump into the post. So first off, I'm loving Smite 2. Pretty much everything feels and plays better, except for some of the changes that seem to have been made for content creators / SPL players. Let's get into it. So yeah, I mean, I agree in general that most of the game feels better at the moment. It's just, lacking content. It's lacking content, especially in regards to non-god content. Everything lately has been adding new gods, which has been really cool, but there is a lack of map development and new game modes and all this other stuff that the game needs. But yeah, in terms of just playing a core match of Conquest, I think Smite 2 already definitely feels better. In the last few years of Smite 1, SPL players and content creators have been advocating for changes that would allow players with greater skill to showcase their abilities. From what I can tell, much of this stems from complaints about losing kills due to Aegis and beads, where ultimates land but are ineffective because relics are used. So yes, SPL players and content creators generally do advocate for changes that would allow for greater skill to showcase their abilities, because generally, if you've invested enough in the game to be a large content creator, or of course if you play in the SPL, you're generally a lot better at the game. And so generally you will advocate for, ways to add more depth to the game, to increase your enjoyment, because if you are a hardcore player that plays the game very competitively, you're going to want more depth in the game, you're going to want more skill expression. Of course, that's not necessarily always the best move. You don't want to make the game so ridiculous where each ability has like 17 different mechanics and you've got to like memorize everything. There's a balance point you can find there, and I think Hi-Rez and Smite generally does find a relatively good balance point with it, especially with all the multiple game modes and some simple gods, some complex gods. And I think there is a lot of content there for every kind of player in Smite. I think it does that a lot better than a lot of other MOBAs actually do in the scene. But yeah, of course, SPL players and content creators, they're going to be more hardcore, they're more invested in the game, they are going to advocate for more skill-based mechanics. But I will say, generally, I don't see a lot of content creators and pro players complaining about losing kills due to Aegis and beads. Yes, it can be annoying. Everyone's raged at losing a kill due to beads Aegis. If no one else is forcing it on your team and you're the jungler and every time you go in on someone they have beads Aegis, it can be frustrating and people might make offhand comments being like, oh fuck those two relics, I wish they weren't here. But I don't think many content creators and SPL players genuinely think this is like a massive problem. Although I do see some, especially that are advocating for the one relic system to stay in Smite 2, saying that, having Aegis and beads, it just kind of removes a lot of counterplay. But then, there is the other side of that coin where the Aegis and beads are the counterplay to certain abilities, and some abilities we've already seen in Smite 2 do kind of cause issues when you don't have Aegis and beads because the game's been balanced around that. But yeah, I wouldn't say much of this stems from complaints about losing kills due to Aegis and beads. I think a lot of the time when people are advocating for greater skill expression, it is in a much larger scope than just we don't like Aegis and beads because they make us not get kills. There's also been frustrations with wards revealing enemy positions before ganks can be executed. As a result, successful ganks rely on players being out of position, and even then those players might escape if their relics are up. These frustrations led to a push to remove wards and relics altogether. This is just either flat out wrong or massively exaggerated. I don't think anyone is pushing to remove relics altogether. Some people are pushing for the one relic system to stay. Probably I would say the slight majority of people are in favor of the one relic system staying in terms of content creators and SPL players. But literally no one is advocating for removing relics altogether. I don't think I've seen a single person advocating for that, and also no one is pushing to remove wards either. If anything, higher level players will use wards more and will want wards to be in the game more, because playing around vision is inherently a skill mechanic. You've got to know where to put your wards, you've got to be buying them all the time, you've got to be buying sentries, you've got to be looking at your map, you've got to have good team play to know what to do with that vision. If you see someone ping up on a ward and they're all alone, if you're not grouped up well as a team, it's not really going to matter in the first place. I think if you could see some kind of graph of wards purchased based on rank, it would be a straight line up and to the right. Hardcore players buy more wards, make more use out of wards. I don't think any high level players are pushing to remove wards from the game. Now onto Smite 2. Initially this push resulted in players being given only one 30-second ward. Later this evolved into the current system of 2-minute wards that can be purchased. Additionally, players now only have access to one relic, but has this led to more skill-based gameplay for content creators? No, you can watch complaint videos from creators like Weekend, Inbound and others where they now suggest further changes in an attempt to fix the very problems they helped create. So in terms of the wards thing, honestly I didn't really see any content creators or pro players pushing for this 30-second free ward kind of system. I know I was actively pushing back against this and was in favor of consumable slots returning and regular purchasable wars with a longer duration returning. I personally made that call. But yeah, I don't think this was something that, you know, like some content creator said and they were like, oh, let's put that in the game. I think it's something they wanted to try for Smite 2. And, you know, Smite 2 is in the alpha phase. They made a lot of changes initially that have either been walked back or completely reworked. And a lot of that has been on feedback from content creators. You know, I don't think every single content creator is inherently pushing for like wars to not be in the game and relics to not be in the game. Like, I just don't think that's happening. And also in general, I think the player base massively overestimates how much influence content creators and pro players have on the game. Yes, our opinions are taken into account, you know, more than like, for example, you watching this will be taken into account. But I think people in the community have this perception of like, oh, because we're in the, like an ambassador program or whatever, you know, we just post something in the ambassador Discord and they immediately just add it to the game or like change it just based on like one content creator's feedback. That's not the case. If the majority of content creators and pro players are complaining about something, that's something they'll take a look at and then they'll evaluate it. Like, the team will evaluate that. But it's not just like, oh, Weekend and Inbound made videos complaining about relics, we're going to remove relics. Like, that just doesn't happen. Can we influence the devs? Obviously a lot more than the average player. Yes, absolutely. But also a lot of the time, feedback that I'm giving about the game is also my personal take, but it's also takes from my audience and from what I've seen in the community at large. You know, I'm pretty in touch with the game. I read Reddit, obviously. As you can see from this video, I read my comment sections all the time. I interact with chat on Twitch, and a lot of the feedback that I give is also based on, you know, what the community is feeling. You know, I've got the feedback of thousands of people to be able to just throw at the devs. And so I do utilize that platform for that reason. But it's not like, you know, anything I say or anything Inbound or Weekend says in the Ambassador Discord just gets added immediately. I do feel like that influence is like overestimated by the community. Ultimately, they are devs with a creative vision. They want to make the game they want to make, but of course they do listen to feedback as well. It's about getting a balance of that. Like, we don't just create the game, which is, I feel like what some people in the Smite community do believe we do. So, issues with the current state of Smite 2. The removal of vision has eliminated the mid-game. Without adequate vision, there's no longer a meaningful laning phase after the early game. Instead of creating opportunities for skilled players to execute ganks, the lack of vision has discouraged individual play entirely. By mid-game, no one does anything alone anymore. The result is a game where everyone moves in small groups or full 5-man squads. Any player foolish enough to roam solo is quickly 4-man ganked and learns not to repeat the mistake. This isn't a meta, it's a reality enforced by the absence of vision. Now we're yet seeing more suggestions on how to fix the game when the solution is glaringly obvious. Okay, this whole paragraph kind of makes no sense to me. Like, this just sounds like, not to be rude, this sounds like a low-level player having low-level complaints about the game that aren't true for most people. Like, by mid-game, no one does anything alone anymore. That's the idea. By the time the mid-game rolls around, at the very least, your mid-jungle support trio is roaming the map, and a lot of the time, you know, solos will be rotating out, ADCs might be rotating out throughout the mid-game. That's kind of the idea. Like, you know, there is a laning phase, and then there is a team fight phase, and that is generally when objectives come online, which is a bit earlier in Smite 2, generally, because objectives are very easy to kill. And so, you know, even when Gold Fury spawns at 5 minutes, you know, within a few minutes, that's probably a threat immediately to be taken. Whereas in Smite 1, it was generally a bit harder to take these objectives, so grouping happened a little bit less. Just because you couldn't take the objective anyway, realistically, in a quick amount of time without the enemy team responding. So why would you bother grouping up? You may as well keep splitting the map and farming as efficiently as you can, which is what the laning phase is about. Also, I wouldn't say there isn't adequate vision. Like, there's 2-minute walls. They're just not 3 minutes like they are in Smite 1. Yes, that's a relatively significant nerf. You know, they last 2/3 the amount of time compared to what they did in Smite 1. But I feel like this guy has like created this paragraph based on the assumption that 30-second wards are still the norm, and they're not. They're 2-minute wards. And like, instead of creating opportunities for skilled players to execute ganks, the lack of vision has discouraged individual play. How does a lack of vision discourage individual play? If anything, too much vision discourages individual play, because if the entire map is warded at all times, you can't go off on your own because the enemy team's going to know you're there and they're going to collapse on you. And like, any player foolish enough to roam solo is quickly 4-man ganked and learns not to repeat the mistake. This is just learning to play Smite. You know, unless you're outside of the laning phase, you generally shouldn't be roaming solo unless you have a solid plan for why you're doing that. You know, are you trying to split push your lane? Are you defending against fire waves? Are you potentially looking to solo an objective with Queen Naga buff or something like that? You know, you gotta have a reason to roam off solo, because roaming off solo is inherently dangerous. That's just how a MOBA works. That's just how Smite works. You know, outside of the laning phase, once you get, you know, into that mid and late game, people are going to be grouping up. And if you're running off on your own, that's your fault. And if you get 4-man ganked, you deserve it. You deserve to die. Like, if your positioning is bad, you've not got enough vision to be able to go off on your own, and you get 4-man ganked, you deserve to die for that. I don't think that's a problem with the game. But the solution, according to this guy, bring back 3-minute wards, stop listening to content creators who primarily make suggestions based on how they can secure more kills kills for themselves. Again, this guy's projecting some kind of malice onto content creators as if they want to make the game, you know, only good for themselves. That's definitely not the case. They're just assuming the worst of content creators, assuming that they're trying to make the game bad for casual players when that's not the case. Of course, we want the game to be good for casual players and competitive players alike, because that's how the game grows. Nobody enjoys being repeatedly destroyed due to a lack of vision. The absence of adequate warding has pushed the grouping phase to begin far too early, disrupting the natural flow of the game. This is why Smite 2 matches often feel off. I think the reason Smite 2 matches feel off and the reason grouping up happens more often is because the game is just very low on player base right now, and you get a lot of matches that are very mismatched. And especially, I've seen a lot of like very new players or very inexperienced players in Smite 2, and inexperienced players will group up more often, actually. You know, they won't group up sensibly. They won't be grouping up with a plan. They won't be grouping up to, you know, do Fire Giant or look to pick someone off. They'll just be grouping up because that feels comfortable. That, you know, they don't want to be off on their own. They probably died to a 4-man gank when they went off on their own, so you just group up and deathball down a lane or whatever. And I think that's part of the problem, you know, just inexperienced players that don't really know anything better than just to group up and deathball down, because maybe they've done that in other games that aren't MOBAs. And also, as I mentioned earlier, objectives are super weak, and so, you know, maybe if you're not in that group where you just kind of group up and deathball because you don't really know how to play the map, even if you do know how to play the map, you're probably also grouping up early because objectives are so easy to kill and objectives are so important. And so you will be grouping up super early, you know, about 10 minutes for those Gold Furies, maybe even earlier, and, you know, 15 minutes for Fire Giant and stuff like that. You will be grouping up for those objectives, so basically at all levels of play, there's more grouping up, but I don't think it's because of a lack of vision. I think this guy's completely off on, like, the diagnosis of why the games feel off and why people are grouping up really early in Smite 2 compared to Smite 1. I don't think a simple change such as making wars last 2 minutes instead of 3 minutes is the entire reason for this. I think there's way more important factors that I just listed. Solution 2, the 1 relic system is okay, but consider CC overload. While having only 1 relic is manageable, the sheer amount of crowd control in Smite continues to grow with the addition of new gods. If something isn't done, 2 relics will likely need to return. One potential fix could be making players CC immune for 1 second after being hit by the first instance of CC, or implementing a similar mechanic to reduce the oppressive nature of chaining CC. CC immune for 1 second on being hit by a first CC is an absolutely terrible idea, and there is a similar mechanic. It's called diminishing returns. It exists in the game. Yes, it was nerfed going into Smite 2, but honestly, probably justified in my opinion, because CC diminishing returns in Smite 1 was just way too oppressive. It didn't really stop chain CCs, it just stopped CCs entirely. You know, if you got hit by a CC 14 seconds ago, you still had DR stacks on you, and then like if you re-engage later, you would just get CC for like almost no amount of time. And it made CCs feel really unrewarding. So what Smite 2 did basically is they reduced CC durations across the board, but they also nerfed DR. So basically it went from like top end CCs and bottom end CCs to like squish them in a little bit. So at the top end you're getting CC'd less, but at the bottom end you're getting CC'd more. But yeah, making players CC immune for 1 second after being hit by the first instance of CC is just ridiculously ham-fisted. It will make the game feel absolutely awful. Diminishing returns already exist. If they wanted to buff diminishing returns, they could. Honestly, like my ideal thing of diminishing returns is like they could maybe buff the percentage that it reduces CCs by, maybe give it 1 extra stack or something, but make it last like 2 seconds or something. I think at the moment it lasts 6. In Smite 1, it lasted 15, which was absolutely ridiculous, but just make it last like 2 seconds, so it is only for chain CC. You know, you're not going to get hit by a CC and then walk away a bit and then like reposition yourself, get hit by another CC and still have DR on you. I think that's where like a lot of the frustration comes with the DR mechanics, so they could maybe buff the percentage that it reduces chain CCs by, but make it for only chain CC. But yeah, that's this post. Maybe we'll read over a few of the comments as well, but I think in general, this guy's just got the complete wrong read on like why a lot of these things are issues. You know, in terms of the vision thing, he doesn't seem to understand vision high level whatsoever. The 1 relic system comments is kind of fine, I guess, other than the CC immune for 1 second is a really bad idea. But again, I think he has the wrong read on it, that like content creators are the sole reason why these problems exist in the game. It's a multitude of factors, and yes, content creators have a lot of influence, way more than the average player, but we don't just design the game, you know. Our considerations are taken into consideration, but they're not just immediately implemented on a whim. And I don't think blaming content creators for every single problem with the game is a good idea, you know. There's some blame on the content creators if they suggest a bad change, there's some blame on the devs for not making the game as good as it could be, there's some blame on the player base for suggesting things that are bad and then realizing they're bad later on. And of course, there's a hefty amount of blame on Smite management for reasons we've discussed in other videos and stuff like that. And like, especially the title of this post is probably meant to be provocative to get clicks, and I guess it works, but like the influence of content creators has definitely not made Smite 2 worse on the aggregate. Yes, some suggestions that have been made by content creators, even some where the majority agree with them, have been bad changes, but yeah, this guy is not considering the immense amount of change that has been made to the game on the suggestion of content creators that they either don't know was a suggestion from them or don't care about. You know, we suggest changes all the time. We give feedback all the time. A lot of the changes that have been made that have made him love Smite 2, you know, considering how bad the initial alpha was, a lot of the change that has come to the game has been off the back of content creators in the Ambassador Discord, testing things, giving feedback, taking everything from their community and feeding it to high-res. I do that a lot. And so, yeah, I think on the aggregate, it's definitely not made Smite 2 worse. It's made Smite 2 a lot better, the influence on content creators, in my opinion. Obviously, I'm biased, but that's my genuine feelings on it. Oh, Mast actually commented on this, which is interesting. I know he made a second channel recently for Smite content, which is really cool. Is blaming content creators here just a massive cope, or am I out of the loop? Yeah, in my opinion, it is massive cope, honestly. As far as I'm aware, these changes have nothing to do with weekend or inbound. When the Smite 2 alpha came out, walls were basically non-existent, but that was just because it was super early access. Yeah, they were testing a new system. Walls lasted a lot less time, but they were free and on a much lower... Well, they weren't, you know, they were on a very low cooldown and they were free, so you could place a lot of them very easily. The one relic system is Hyra's attempting to not overload active keybinds for both PC and console players, mainly console there. I don't think PC players would have an issue with this, but obviously the console player base absolutely needs to be taken into account for Smite. It's at least half of the player base. So, you know, I'm perfectly fine to sacrifice some things as a PC player to keep console players happy because they are a large part of the player base and they deserve some respect. And I think that is probably even a larger part of the reason why they did this than like content creators saying 2 relics and Beat Aegis is annoying to play into, which honestly I don't think like Beat Aegis being annoying to play into is a high level take. Like everyone complains about that at any level of play. I would prefer to get 2 relics back. I think Blink Beads and Beat Aegis are necessary staples considering every god is getting potted over in nearly the same state as they are in Smite 1. Yeah, this is the key thing. Like if they're not going to make fundamental changes to the game, the one relic system is going to fall apart very quickly, in my opinion. But they do seem to be trying to make major changes. They've nerfed some CC in recent patches. Obviously, the CC buffering system is being tested at the moment, and if they can get that into a good state, I think it will definitely help a lot with the situation. And active items can help as well. You know, if they want to, at some point, they could add a single target beads just for you on a damage item, and then damage dealers could get access to beads in their build. But even then, like, that's a little bit, you know, Talisman is already being built a lot on damage dealers. I feel like if they added a damage dealer version of beads, every single damage roll would just buy it every single game, and it kind of homogenizes builds, which is why I don't think active items are like the best way to necessarily completely replace the relic system. But again, I don't see anyone arguing for a complete replacement of the relic system. Anyone that is arguing for that is probably stupid, in my opinion. A lot of these effects are just far too powerful to be putting on active items. We saw it when Blink was an active item. Junglers were rushing it first item when it had tank stats, and it was really weird. And so yeah, I don't think some of these effects, especially Blink Beat Aegis, should be on active items, in my opinion. But again, no one's really arguing for that. The most people are arguing for is staying with the one relic system, which I think is workable if they make significant change. But I have to say, your final suggestion is legitimately awful. It's just an insanely scuffed version of diminishing returns. Yeah, exactly. I mentioned this. Like, diminishing returns already exist to solve this. This would just be a way more frustrating version of diminishing returns, what he suggested. Like, it would be really frustrating to play into. And yeah, as Matt says, the slow from Ymir 2 won't proc after his 3. Like, this will work on soft CC as well, whereas currently diminishing returns only applies to hard CC. Also, I think there's a 90% chance you just got yourself a weekend video. Maybe Weekend's made a reaction to this. You got yourself an Into Games video as well. But yeah, there you go. That's my thoughts on this Reddit post that kind of blew up a few days ago. It was very controversial, 73% upvoted. I just thought I would give my perspective on it as a content creator for the game. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. Let me know your own thoughts down below. Do you think content creators have generally made the game worse? Do you think content creators have too much influence? It'll be an interesting discussion down in the comments, and I will catch you guys for another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.